The cry in the darkness. The night was cold and silent on the ruined alien planet. The sky was painted with dark clouds, hiding the moons. A thin mist moved between the broken walls of the old city. Somewhere in the distance, metal groaned and collapsed, but no one came to see. No one ever did. That I in the middle of this dead place. A faint sound broke the silence. That it was not the wind. That it was not the sound of falling stone. That it was a voice, small, soft, and full of fear. That a young alien girl sat curled up under a piece of broken metal. Her skin was pale blue, glowing faintly in the darkness like the light of deep ocean water. Her big silver eyes were wet with tears. She was shaking, hugging her knees close to her chest. The fabric of her clothes was torn, and her small hands were covered in dirt. She had been alone for many hours. She had not eaten. She had not slept. And worst of all, she could hear them. From somewhere in the shadows came the sound of claws scratching against stone. Slow, dragging, hungry. The sound came from the streets, from the rooftops, from the tunnels under the ground. She knew what it meant. The monsters were hunting again. She pressed her hands over her mouth to keep from making a sound. But she could still hear the low growls, deep, rumbling, and close. Her heart was beating so fast she thought it might break. Every shadow looked like teeth. Every breath of wind felt like claws on her neck. She wanted to scream for help, but she had already learned the truth. No one was coming. Her people were gone. Her mother had told her to hide when the attack began. She had heard the screams, the strange voices, and the crashing sound of walls breaking. She had seen the monsters for the first time, tall, twisted shapes with too many arms and mouths filled with sharp, shining teeth. She had run as fast as she could, and when she stopped, she was here. Alone. The scratching sound came again, this time much closer. She froze. Her breath caught in her throat. From the darkness between two broken buildings, a pair of glowing yellow eyes appeared. They blinked once, twice, then began to move toward her. She could see the shadow behind them now, long legs, wide shoulders, and claws that scraped the ground as it walked. The monster lowered its head, sniffing the air. Her body wanted to run, but her legs would not move. She knew she could not outrun it. She was trapped. The creature came closer, its growl low and sharp. Another pair of yellow eyes appeared beside the first, and then another. There were 3 of them now. The girl's tears began to fall faster, but she kept her hands tight over her mouth. One of the monsters stepped into the moonlight. Its skin was black and rough like stone, its jaw too wide for its head, lined with teeth that gleamed. Long strings of drool dripped onto the ground. The other 2 stayed just in the shadows, waiting. The girl's eyes darted around, looking for a way out, but there was none. The buildings were too broken to climb, the street too open to run. She felt her heart sink. This was the end. Then, a new sound broke the silence. A heavy footstep. Then another, and another. The monsters stopped moving. Their heads turned toward the sound. The air grew tense, the mist curling in the stillness. The girl's eyes widened. She could not see who it was. She could not tell if it was another predator, or something else. The footsteps came closer, slow but steady. A shadow appeared at the end of the street, tall, human-shaped, but wearing armor dented and burned. The figure limped slightly, one hand gripping something long and sharp. The monsters hissed, lowering themselves, ready to strike. The figure stepped into the moonlight. It was a man, his face partly hidden by a cracked visor. Blood streaked the side of his jaw, but his eyes were alive with focus. His armor was scratched and dirty, and a strange patch on his arm showed a flag the girl had never seen before. The man looked at her for only a moment. Then he turned his eyes to the monsters, and the monsters growled back. The girl's breath shook. She didn't know if this human was here to save her or to fight for his own survival. She only knew one thing: something was about to happen. The first monster moved, snapping its jaws. The human stepped forward, lifting his broken weapon. The metal in his hand caught the moonlight, glinting like fire in the dark. No one spoke. No one blinked. And in that silent moment before the storm, the girl realized she was not alone anymore. The last human, the man's name was Daniel Cross, but nobody had called him that in a long time. Most who knew him, back when humans still had armies, called him Ghost. Because Daniel never stayed where death wanted him to be. Now, standing on the cracked street of a dead alien city, facing 3 monsters with nothing but a shard of metal in his hand, he looked like a man who had finally run out of miracles. His ship had fallen from the sky hours ago, torn apart by enemy fire. The rest of his crew, gone. The communicator on his arm, silent. His rifle, lost in the wreck. His body, already bleeding from a dozen cuts. And yet, his eyes burned with the same dangerous light that made him survive every impossible battle before this one. The monsters in front of him shifted. their claws scraping against the ground like knives over bone. One let out a low snarl, the kind that made weaker prey collapse before the attack even began. Daniel didn't collapse that he stepped forward. The alien girl didn't know why she felt her fear change into something else, something sharper, when she saw him move. His steps were slow, steady, almost like he was daring the monsters to try. One of the creatures lunged first. It was fast, a blur of teeth and claws. But Daniel moved faster, twisting his body just enough to avoid the first strike, then slashing with the shard of metal. The blade caught the creature's face, leaving a long, deep cut that sizzled in the cold air. The monster roared in pain, stumbling back. The other two didn't wait. They attacked together. Daniel dropped low, sweeping the shard across one's legs while his shoulder slammed into the other. The force of the impact sent a sharp jolt of pain up his arm, but he didn't stop. His breathing grew heavier, but his focus never broke. He fought like a man who already knew he wouldn't get a second chance. The girl's silver eyes followed every move. She had seen warriors before, but this was different. There was no hesitation. No fear. Only the raw, burning will to keep moving forward, no matter the cost. One monster clawed Daniel's side. Blood spilled quickly, warm against the cold night. He didn't even look at the wound. He drove his elbow into the creature's skull and shoved it away. The largest monster circled him now, its mouth stretching two wide rows of teeth shining like wet glass. It hissed, crouched low, and sprang with terrifying speed. Daniel didn't step back, that he stepped into the attack. The shard of metal drove deep into the monster's throat. Hot, black blood sprayed across Daniel's armor as the creature collapsed, shaking the ground. The other two froze for a heartbeat, then screeched and vanished back into the dark mist. Silence returned, except for the heavy sound of Daniel's breathing. That he looked at the girl. She was still hiding, her eyes wide, her breath fast. For a moment they just stared at each other. They didn't share a language. They didn't need one. Daniel knelt beside her. His visor was cracked, but she could see his eyes now, tired, sharp, and human. He glanced at her torn clothes, the dirt on her skin, the way her small hands trembled. Then he said one quiet word, almost like a promise. Safe. The girl didn't understand the word, but she understood the voice. And for the first time since the attack began, she believed she might survive. But Daniel knew better. This planet was crawling with worse things than the monsters he'd just fought. And somewhere out there, the real hunters would hear the noise soon. He stood, scanning the mist-covered streets. Somewhere far off, he could hear the faint echo of more claws. He reached down, offering her his hand. She hesitated, then took it. And together, the last human soldier and the lost alien child began moving deeper into the ruins, straight toward the danger neither of them could yet imagine. The fight in the shadows, the ruins were quiet again, but Daniel knew it was the wrong kind of quiet, the kind where everything is listening. The mist was thicker here, curling around broken walls and melted steel. Every shadow looked alive. The air was heavy, full of the faint stench of blood and rot. Somewhere far above, the sky rumbled like a warning. The alien girl stayed close to him, gripping his hand with surprising strength for someone so small. Her glowing skin made her easy to spot in the dark, so Daniel pulled a torn cloak from the ground and wrapped it around her. She vanished into the folds of the dark fabric, only her eyes shining faintly. They moved through an alley where the walls leaned in like they wanted to crush anything passing through. The ground was slick. Each step sounded too loud. No matter how carefully he moved, a faint sound came from behind. Tap, tap. Then silence. Daniel didn't turn his head. Turning would give away that he'd heard. Instead, he slowed his steps slightly, letting his breathing match the sound of the girl's. His other hand tightened on the shard of metal. Tap, tap. This time, closer. They weren't alone. He pulled the girl behind a broken pillar, pressing her down with a finger to his lips. Her eyes widened, but she didn't make a sound. From the mist ahead, something moved, too fast to see clearly, but big enough to make the ground whisper under its weight. Then another shape slid across the alley entrance, and another. They weren't the same as the monsters from before. These were thinner, taller, their limbs bending the wrong way. Their claws were long and hooked, designed not just to kill, but to drag prey away. Daniel's mind worked fast. Fighting in the open would get them surrounded. He needed shadows. He needed to break their pattern. The creatures' heads turned in slow, jerky movements. They sniffed the air. One stopped and hissed, a sharp, wet sound that made the girl flinch. The sound echoed off the walls, and more claws scratched in answer. Daniel's jaw tightened. Time was running out. He reached into his belt pouch and pulled out a small flare, his last one. He didn't light it. Instead, he tossed a pebble down the alley. The creatures moved instantly toward the sound, their bodies sliding unnaturally fast, like spiders over glass. Daniel grabbed the girl's hand and moved in the opposite direction, silent as a shadow. But one creature stopped, its head tilted toward them, and it smiled. Daniel saw the glint of its teeth in the mist before it lunged. The world exploded into movement. Daniel shoved the girl behind a chunk of wall and met the creature mid-leap, driving his shard up into its jaw. Hot black blood sprayed over his arm and the thing shrieked, high and metallic, before collapsing. The scream drew the others. Dozens of yellow eyes flared in the mist. Daniel grabbed the girl, his voice low and urgent. Run. They ran through the maze of ruins, their footsteps chased by inhuman screeches. A claw swiped from the side. Daniel blocked with his arm guard, feeling the impact shake through his bones. Another creature leapt from above. He ducked, letting it smash into the wall. Every turn, every shadow, they were there. The girl stumbled once, but Daniel caught her without slowing. He was moving on instinct now, every step a calculation, every breath a fight to keep going. Ahead, a collapsed section of the city wall glowed faintly, an opening to the lower tunnels. It was risky. Down there, vision meant nothing and sound ruled. But up here, they'd be dead in seconds. Daniel dove through the gap, pulling the girl with him. The tunnel swallowed them in pitch black. The sounds of claws scraped at the entrance, then faded. The only sound left was their breathing. Daniel crouched low, listening to the silence that he knew this wasn't over. In the dark, things worse than claws and teeth were waiting. And somewhere deeper in these tunnels, the real nightmare lived. An unlikely bond. The tunnel swallowed all light. Daniel's visor was cracked. But even if it worked, there was no glow left in its battery. Here, sight was useless. The only things that mattered were sound, smell, and instinct. The alien girl clung to his cloak, following the pull of his hand. Her faint glow lit a small circle around them, like a fragile bubble in the darkness. Daniel almost told her to cover it. Light could draw predators, but something in the way her glow trembled told him it wasn't just light. It was her fear. Every few steps, water dripped from above, echoing far away. Sometimes the echo was wrong, split into more than one direction. Daniel knew that meant the tunnels were bigger than they looked, and that something might be moving in those spaces. They found an alcove, an old storage space, its metal door long rusted open. Daniel led her inside, checking the corners with his shard ready. Empty. For now he lowered himself against the wall, breathing slow, letting his heart steady. The girl stayed standing, watching him with those silver eyes. Her cloak slipped, and the glow of her skin grew stronger in the dark. Daniel studied her face. Dirt streaked across her cheeks, a bruise darkened one temple. She was young, far too young to be in a place like this. Her eyes darted to the wound on his side. The cut was deep and he'd been ignoring it for too long. She hesitated, then pulled something from a pouch tied to her waist, a small bundle of glowing green leaves. She crushed them in her palms, the smell sharp and strange, and pressed them gently to his wound. The pain flared, sharp and hot. Daniel clenched his jaw but didn't push her away. Slowly, the burning eased into a dull throb. Thanks, he said quietly. She didn't understand the word, but she smiled faintly. Her hands shook. Not from the work, but from everything else. From the running, the fear, the things in the mist. Daniel reached into his chest pocket and pulled out a small silver wrapper. He tore it open and handed her half of a chocolate bar, dark, melted at the edges. She sniffed it, curious. Then took a bite. The taste hit her like a spark. Her eyes widened in shock, then closed in quiet wonder. For the first time since he'd found her, she made a sound that wasn't fear, a soft, almost laughing gasp. For a moment they just sat there. He couldn't speak her language and she couldn't speak his. But in the middle of this dead world, they understood the same thing. Neither of them was alone anymore. A faint sound broke the moment. Not a drip of water. Not a shifting stone. A whisper. Daniel's head turned sharply toward the tunnel entrance. The girl froze. It came again, soft, sliding like claws brushing over metal. They weren't alone down here. Daniel rose slowly, his hand gripping the shard. He moved to the tunnel mouth, peering into the dark. The sound faded again, replaced by silence, but it was the same wrong silence he'd heard before. He turned back to the girl. She was already pulling the cloak tight, her glow dimming as if she could hide it by will alone. Stay close, he whispered. They slipped back into the tunnels, their steps quiet. The air felt heavier now, like the walls were leaning in. Somewhere ahead, the tunnels began to breathe. Not with wind, but with the steady, low sound of something alive. Something big. And for the first time, Daniel wondered if the monsters outside were the smaller threat. The monster's nest. The tunnels narrowed, forcing Daniel to crouch. The air was heavier here, thick with the smell of rot and something sharper, like burned metal. Each breath felt like inhaling the inside of a furnace. The girl stayed close, her small hand gripping the back of his armor. Her glow was faint now, barely enough to outline their shapes, but it was still dangerous. It felt like they were moving through the throat of some enormous beast, one that hadn't decided to swallow them yet. Far ahead, the darkness shifted at first. It was only a faint pulsing, almost like light. But the closer they moved, the more Daniel realized it wasn't light, it was heat. The walls began to sweat with a faint shimmer, and strange veins of glowing green ran through the stone, like the planet itself was alive. The sound came next at a deep, wet rhythm, like hundreds of lungs breathing together. Sometimes it synced with the pulse of the green veins, sometimes it didn't. The effect was wrong. The tunnel widened into a cavern, and Daniel froze at the edge. It was a nest. Not like the nest he'd seen from alien insects, not like animal burrows. This was built. Layer after layer of organic webbing stretched across the ceiling, holding massive cocoons the size of vehicles. The floor was uneven, covered in bones, some picked clean, some still wearing scraps of flesh and clothing. In the center, a massive pit glowed with the same green light as the veins in the walls. Shapes moved inside it, writhing slowly, like half-formed creatures waiting to be born. The girl's grip on him tightened. She whispered something in her own language, voice trembling, and pointed toward a high ledge at the far side of the cavern. Daniel followed her gaze. His breath caught. There were more of her kind up there. At least a dozen. Weak, thin, bound in sticky black cords that stuck them to the rock wall. Some still moved, others hung limp. The cords pulsed faintly as if feeding something hidden beneath the surface. The girl's voice broke. She didn't need to translate. Daniel understood. Her family was up there. But there was a problem. Between them and the ledge moved dozens of the tall, thin creatures they'd seen in the tunnels. They crawled over the walls, upside down on the ceiling, in and out of the glowing pit. Their movements were jerky, unpredictable, and inhuman. And there was something else. In the deepest shadow at the far end of the cavern, something huge shifted. Its movement made the floor tremble slightly, and a slow, low clicking sound rolled through the air. The others, the ones Daniel thought were monsters, moved differently when the clicks came. They flinched. They made space. This was no random nest. This was a hive. And the thing in the shadows was the queen. Daniel's mind worked fast. If he wanted his distress beacon to send a strong enough signal to call for rescue, he'd have to place it high in open air, right on that ledge. But getting there meant passing through the heart of the hive, with a child in tow, and somehow surviving the queen's notice. The girl looked up at him. Her eyes were wide, but there was no pleading, just raw, desperate need. Daniel clenched his jaw. He'd told himself once that this fight wasn't his. That his mission was to survive, nothing more. But somewhere between the crash and now, that mission had changed. He leaned close to the girl and whispered two words she wouldn't understand, but she would feel them. We fight. He checked the shard in his hand, looked at the half-empty pouch of explosives on his belt, and began mapping the cavern in his mind. Every shadow, every cover, every possible kill zone. Somewhere in the dark, the queen clicked again, louder this time. The walls seemed to lean inward, and the breathing sound grew faster. The fight for the ledge, and for their lives, was about to begin. The rescue and the firestorm. The queen moved. It wasn't a step. It was an earthquake wearing flesh. From the far shadows of the cavern, her form rose, taller than a dropship, her body an armor of black plates and green-veined flesh. Multiple jaws opened and closed in slow sequence, drool dripping into the glowing pit below. Her many eyes reflected the cavern's sickly light like pools of acid. The smaller creatures froze at her presence, claws twitching, heads bowed. The hive obeyed her. Daniel's heartbeat stayed steady, but his grip on the shard tightened until his knuckles ached. This was it. No second tries. He knelt beside the girl, speaking low and firm. You stay hidden, no matter what you hear. Understand? She didn't understand the words, but she understood his eyes. She nodded once, her small hands clutching the cloak tighter. Daniel pulled the last 3 explosives from his pouch, small, shaped charges meant for breaching starship hulls. Enough to collapse this entire chamber, if placed right. The plan was insane. Draw the smaller creatures away from the prisoners. Reach the ledge, plant the charges on the queen's feeding veins. Trigger the beacon and pray rescue comes before the cavern becomes their grave. He moved first. A quick, loud strike, smashing a bone pile with his shard, sent a sharp crack echoing through the nest. The nearest hunter's head snapped toward him. Then he ran. They followed. Claws scraped stone, bodies moved like blurs along the walls and ceiling. Daniel darted between pillars of hardened resin. keeping his movements sharp and unpredictable. Every second bought the prisoners a little more time. One creature leapt, its shadow swallowing him. He rolled under it, came up swinging, and sliced through its leg. It shrieked, drawing even more toward him. Good. The queen's clicking grew faster, deeper. The sound carried weight, pressing against the air like a storm front. Daniel felt it in his ribs that he reached the base of the ledge, saw the prisoners' terrified faces, thin, weak, but alive. The girl's eyes were among them now, watching from where he'd told her to hide. Almost there, he muttered that he began to climb. Claws raked the rock inches from his boots. One hunter caught his ankle, but he kicked free, driving his shard into its skull before pulling himself over the lip. The captives were bound tight in resin. He cut fast, freeing the first, then the second. Their breathing was weak, but when he pointed toward the exit tunnel above, they moved. Survival didn't need translation. Then, movement behind him. The queen had begun to climb, her massive body defied her size, pulling up the ledge like a predator half her mass. Every step shook the rock. Her jaws opened wide, revealing a second set inside. Daniel planted the first charge on the wall vein, green light flared beneath the resin. He moved to the second, cutting another captive free along the way. The queen's shadow loomed over him now. Heat radiated from her body, thick with the stink of decay and acid that he slapped the last charge in place, pulled the detonator from his belt, and pressed it into the freed alien girl's hands. He mimed pressing it, then pointed toward the queen. Her eyes widened in understanding. Daniel turned to face the queen, shard ready. The click of her jaws became a roar. She lunged, faster than anything that size should move. Daniel met her head on, slashing across one of her eyes. Acid sprayed, hissing against his armor. Pain burned deep into his side, but he didn't fall back. Now, he shouted. The detonator clicked. Light, heat, the cavern erupted, the wall veins exploded in green fire, resin walls collapsing. The queen screamed, a sound so loud it shook dust from the ceiling. Her massive form thrashed as the structure around her gave way, burying her under tons of stone and molten resin. Daniel grabbed the last captive, hauling them toward the escape tunnel. Behind him, the entire nest burned, and above the firestorm, faint but clear, came the sound of engines, rescue ships, drawn by the beacon's final pulse. They weren't safe yet, but they were alive. And for Daniel Cross, that was enough to keep fighting. The sky opens, the tunnel spat them out into the open night like a wounded animal coughing up its last breath. Daniel stumbled forward, lungs burning from smoke and ash, his side soaked with blood. Behind him, the alien girl clung to his cloak with one hand and pushed a smaller rescued child ahead with the other. The rest of the survivors moved in a shaky line, some limping, some carried. The nest was gone. The ground where it had stood glowed an angry green, the air above it rippling with heat. A plume of smoke climbed into the sky, black against the twin moons, but the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that waits to be broken. Daniel scanned the ruins, his shard still in hand. He knew too well, where there was one hive there were more. And the sound of their destruction would carry for miles. The girl tugged at his arm and pointed upward. At first he saw nothing. Then, far above, a glint of silver broke through the smoke. Engines. Rescue. The dropship descended in a slow arc, its searchlights cutting spears of white through the darkness. Dust swirled under the force of its thrusters as it landed on the shattered street. The ramp dropped with a hiss and armored figures poured out. Human soldiers, weapons ready, eyes scanning for threats. One of them spotted Daniel. Ghost? The voice cracked in disbelief. We thought you were dead. Daniel didn't answer. He was already lifting the smallest alien child into the arms of a medic. One by one, the survivors were guided aboard. The soldiers looked confused. This wasn't the mission they'd come for, and these weren't their people. But the unspoken truth in Daniel's glare told them. They were people. That was enough. The alien girl was the last to board. She stopped halfway up the ramp, looking back at him. Her silver eyes glistened, not with fear but with something else. She stepped close, reaching up with small fingers to touch the side of his cracked visor. Then, in a voice rough from days of crying and running, she spoke a single word in perfect human tongue. Hero. Daniel froze. The word carried more weight than any metal he'd ever worn. He felt the burn of every wound, the ache in every muscle. But for the first time none of it mattered. The engines roared, lifting them into the night sky. Through the open ramp, Daniel watched the burning nest shrink into nothing, the glow fading beneath clouds. One of the soldiers asked, "Where to, Ghost?" Daniel looked out at the stars, their cold light reflecting in his eyes. "Somewhere safe," he said. Then after a beat, "For all of us." The ramp closed. The ship climbed higher until the smoke and the ruins were just another shadow on a forgotten world. And far below, in the silence that followed, the monsters of the dark learned something new. Humans don't just survive, they save.